example, because you know, with all these statistics of, I don't know, like creams, we tested in 100 girls and 10 thought that they may have it. So it's good to have like a number of.
Yes, Robert. Yes, Robert. Yes. Thank you.
I was anticipating that question. The sample is relatively modest. What I mean by that is we'll be looking at something in the region of just under 60 people. But those 60 people were not just any 60 people who took out of a large population, but there were 60 people whom we thought perhaps could, in fact, play a role in the bigger project. So they were what we would call influencers and people who could actually persuade their colleagues in a way to change their behavior.
Thank you, Robert. A second question?
Hello, Simon Ward from British Council. Suki, question for you. Thank you very much for that. Trying to glue it to the previous speaker. When you were implementing your initiatives in your test stores, how did you involve the staff at those stores to help you deliver? Or was it all technology-based?
It is all the trial stores were designed to try and test technologies in the environment of the stores, but obviously we had to consult with the store management staff, the store operations teams during the process of the implementation of the project. We also consult with our retail colleagues who, once we've implemented things like the dimming lighting, we bring them on site and say, what do you think? Do you like it? Does it work? Does it not work? So it's in consultation with everybody on site. The store also, they'll have Plan A champions, and they know that we're doing these projects. They've seen the outcomes of the projects. They've seen the positive impact on their energy consumption. So it's certainly not done as, we're not flying in as a technical team doing the project and then walking away. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think what you're doing is you were testing the technology to see what would happen with just the technology. Do you think you could have done even better if you had greater staff engagement?
I would say the types of technologies we tested were generally automatic lighting and HVAC type controls. So possibly not. It's a good question. I'm actually doing the project review at the moment, so I can go away and add that to my questions to answer.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, actually. I don't know if anyone else on the panel would like to answer that one.
I didn't quite understand the question.
I think the question was that M&S has trialled various technologies, but if they'd engaged the staff in the store as part of those technology trials to probably a greater extent, could they have achieved greater savings than they saw in the trial stores?
If I may just add to that answer, I think I go back to the Code for Homes example that was given by Simon. And I think in our previous conversation we also referred to energy efficient cars. I firmly believe that it is absolutely essential before technology is introduced that the people who are going to be affected by that technology are in fact A, informed, and B, they are actually helped with the use of it. Now sometimes that technology is a little bit indirect. In other words, it will carry on doing things. But I believe it's absolutely essential that they do play a part in it, either passively or actively.
I've also got some anecdotal evidence. You saw a picture there with the headmaster of the school. The reason their hot water and heating was left on all the time was because the caretaker didn't have confidence that it would actually come back on again. It took us a while to persuade him that we could actually start turning the hot water and the heating off. And it was very, very gently, baby steps. We'll turn it off overnight. We'll start it at 5 o'clock in the morning because he really didn't think it would heat up the school in time. this, a year now into it, he is instrumental in turning the whole system off. It was off for the whole of the 6 weeks holiday. It was even off over Christmas. And believe me, if you'd seen what that school had operated like beforehand, that was an instance where the technology gave him confidence in working with it. And we've now handed the control over to him. He phones up when he wants the heating on and off, and he is quite happy with it. And he's challenging him now to actually produce more energy savings, where we have to say to him, no, I really think you should turn it on a little bit more than half an hour before the children come in, because it really won't heat up. But technology and people definitely together.
Thank you, Julie. Do we have another question?
Dave Wales from Oxford Instruments. I'm going to be greedy because I've got 3 questions. We saved 1 million kilowatt hours at one of our plants last year, and that was about 30% of the energy used in the plant, and that was basically by turning things off. Question 1, where would you start with technology going forward from there? Question 2, we're about to renegotiate our energy contract, or our electricity contract, and I was going to buy electricity from renewable sources, but I understand I can't offset it against the carbon footprint. Why not? I forgot what the third point was.
Big secret.
Yes, and an opinion on voltage power optimization, if possible.
Drag that one out.
Yeah, as I work for EDF Energy, I suppose I better comment on your renewables. I don't know. I hasten to add, I don't work on the supply side, I work for energy services. However, it's quite simple. You can't buy it from the grid because it's already got rocks on it, and they count it as double counting. It really is that simple. You want to generate on site and use it and not sell the rocks and not get a feed-in tariff, then you can count it. So it's all to do with double counting. Voltage optimization, no comment, it depends. And also for your technology question as well, it depends. It depends on the type of business you run, the type of buildings you operate from, the amount of people that you've got there. It's really horses for courses.
Can I put the question back to the gentleman, James, regarding the type of load you have at your... Is it a factory?
It's a manufacturing site.
Right. So do you have lots and lots of motors?
Not a tremendous amount. I mean, the total energy usage, it's down to 1.6 gigawatts on electricity and about 700 megawatts on gas.
Yeah. I think as my colleague earlier indicated, that in terms of VO voltage optimization, it's very much dependent on the profile of your factory by way of where the energy flows, and that will actually dictate what level of saving you might achieve. In terms of your tariffs, I think that was a good answer in terms of double accounting, so I won't go into that. You asked about where do you go beyond turning off plant and equipment. Well, that's a brilliant start. I guess where you go beyond that is you employ an expert to actually take you through various steps to the next steps, because the next steps are going to be a little bit more sophisticated and complicated.
Yeah, I think our concern is we will be full participants in the CRC.
Yes.
And I'm now cautious about putting all the eggs into this year and getting a large reduction,
Yes.
rather than a phased approach over the next 3 to 5 years.
Very good point. I think that's where you need to then seek maybe some advice as to how to plan, maybe a flatline plan of action that will allow your company not to yo-yo up and down in its performance, but be consistent in terms of its lead position and savings it achieves.
I think we're struggling because we had such good savings last year. We're maintaining them, but only just. We're just slightly going above last year's usage on occasion.
I understand.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, James. I get quite passionate about energy efficiency, which is quite sad because anybody else says it's possibly the most boring subject going, but they're wrong. But I must admit, I do get a little bit frustrated with people that say, oh, the CRC is coming, I want a good lead position, therefore I'm not going to do anything. You really need to look at how much you will be spending on energy that you don't necessarily need to use. And yeah, okay, I think the league table is almost becoming the importance. I understand reputational drivers, really I do. Part of a large company, we are in the CRC as well. But the other thing is, as everybody knows, the cheapest energy is that you don't use. So if you can stop using it, you will save money. You can start putting that money, ring-fencing that money for more capital-intensive projects in the future. There may be something that you can do now, but you don't have the capital budget for it. If you save that money, ring-fence that money, put it into place further down the line of the CMC, then you could have a really good impact on your league. But saying I'm not doing anything now because of the league tables is counterproductive.
I think I said I was cautious.
Do we have another question somewhere?
Ian Jackson, Impress Metal Packaging. Back to the Marks and Spencers. You mentioned 20%, 30% savings with the size. What savings are you seeing in all the other sites where you've not done the technology?
It varies. Is probably the best answer to that. We've got over 600 stores, so some of the stores we can go in and they're in a terrible state in terms of the way the energy is actually being used, so you can get people to turn things off with what's available and make quite substantial savings. Other stores, the staff are on top of things and we won't see additional savings without investment. So there isn't really a definitive answer to that. I think the savings we saw there were on top of what the staff were already trying to do within those stores.
I'm now sat in the audience, so I might take my right to be able to ask a question. I thought it was quite an interesting one around legislation, and I know, Julie, you mentioned in your presentation about the whole raft of legislation that's coming through. Off the back of the CRC question, I wonder, in your view, what do we think is going to have the biggest impact? And maybe if Julie thinks about that initially from a technology perspective, but from a people's perspective, is there a different legislative type, policy that's on the way that could impact energy efficiency more?
All eyes on me. You think? I've got an answer for everything. I think the legislation is going to get tighter because, especially around the technology aspect, we've already seen it with GLS bulbs being phased out. The word on the grapevine is the next thing is going to be halogen downlighters. The dichroics are going to be phased out. Who knows? So I think the powers that be have looked at what they can impact easiest, and it is technology. It's far easier to ban a bulb than tell people, oh, please don't buy it. Of course, you get stockpilers, but you get hoarders everywhere, I think. So, no, legislation is going to work through technology and try and buy hearts and minds on the way.
But yeah, I was trying to tease out of you which policy you thought might have the biggest impact.
Which policy?
Yeah, so you talked about EPCs and DECs as part of your presentation. We just talked about the CRC. Do we think...
I would like to have seen a combined EPC-DEC. The true EPC, as in the EU delivered, whereby it's assets and people. I think you can have either or. If you've got a not an old building, as I said, that comes up with a D, people can then rest on their laurels and say, my building is fantastic, it's a D rating. And then you look at it in more depth and it's actually a G. Well, it's the energy it's consuming. That's what this is all about. So I think the DC is a driver for technology and actually for behavioural change as well. The CLC, I don't know. I think people are going to look at technology because in some instances it's easier and more apparent.
So I was wondering, going over to the people champions, we've also obviously got the potential upgrades to Part L of the building regulations. So asking you both the same question, what policy do you think might have the biggest impact on energy efficiency going forward?
I think from the human side of things, we are almost certainly going to need a couple of major energy shocks. I think that's going to be the key determinant for this, because there's only so much that legislation and policy and the fiscal mechanisms can actually achieve from this. I do believe that within the next 5 years we will have energy shocks, and that will really be the human and behavioural side of things to make people realise that it isn't just this endless supply that you get at the flick of a switch. So I think from the human side of things, that's really going to be the key one. And sadly, I do think it's going to be quite painful learning and steep learning curve for people to realise that there does need to be change.
I'd like to present a slightly different angle to this and suggest that generally tipping points take place. Has anyone read the book The Tipping Point? Have you? You will know one of the examples. It was about the hush puppy shoes, wasn't it? If you remember that. Now, there was no legislation at the time for people to start wearing hush puppies. In fact, it was exactly the opposite, that hush puppies were meant to be very staid and very old-fashioned and not really hip. However, a bunch of young guys decided to wear hush puppies somewhere in, I think, California, if I remember correctly, or maybe not. And within no time, it became a real fashion item. I also believe with energy drinks that could be a vehicle for making energy efficiency a mass interest. I mean, in one of my graphs, you might remember, it was about who might actually influence your behavior. And one of the answers was colleagues. I think it was the second one down, after information. So, although legislation can trigger things, and we have already seen with that gentleman with the CRC that he's already sort of juxtaposing the position. But that's what it is to comply. For energy to become something more inherently important, I think it will take a group of people to make it fashionable.
Thank you. Any other questions? Perhaps I can throw a question out to the audience. I asked at the beginning for you to think about your response to that question. Has anyone changed their view, out of interest? Would anyone like to comment more generally on whether they think the secret is people or technology?
I think it has to be both. I think from our experience, we've done the people thing, and now we're approaching the technology thing. So you can't do it all with people. You can get major gains with technology. So you have to have people on board to do that. I think.
Anyone else want to offer?
Sorry, this is addressed to the lady at Marks and Spencer's, and I was just wondering that in all of your description description, you didn't actually mention customers. And I'm just wondering how you sort of take account of customers sort of setting plan A or just about any other plan that you might put in, in place. How do you actually compensate for consumer behaviour the minute they walk through those doors? Because it strikes me that there's all sorts of things that we as consumers do or more often don't do that can perhaps have a big impact, in a positive or a negative way on the things that you choose to implement.
Well, everything that we do from an energy management point of view is done with a view of having no negative impact on our customers' experience. So it means that we sometimes have to take baby steps to achieve what we need to achieve. And yes, you're right, customers can have an impact. They'll maybe complain about an environment, or we will get feedback through our maintenance colleagues and through our store colleagues. So we do have to make sure that everything we do takes that into consideration. We're not going to change the world. There's going to be nothing radical, particularly. Does that answer your question?
It does up to a point, but I'm thinking about things like the types of refrigeration or I suppose the freezer units that you use, things like that. And obviously there has to be a level of sort of personal comfort in terms of if, for example, the stores are too cold, people won't want to use the change rooms, things like that. I mean, obviously with the posters that are up in store and with the sort of policy on not handing out plastic bags or whatever it happens to be, you've gone quite a long way, not just in terms of actually achieving your goals, but actually in educating your consumers about where you're going with this and why you're taking those steps. So I just wondered, what was the route to actually, take that a step further and involve them a little bit more to the point where you're saying, we're not going to do this, that, and the other because of the. Because I know obviously lots of other stores have followed suit and they haven't been perhaps quite as. I use the word draconian advisedly, but I mean, if you went into a supermarket now, they would say, have you got your own bags or do you need one? And I was at a supermarket the other day and a man was asked that, and he said, and she gave him, he said yes, he needed a bag, and she said, oh, thank you for that. And she said, well, we still do hand them out. He said, no, I was in here last week and I forgot to bring my bags, and I happened, the person asked me the question. And when I said, yes, I do need one, he said, she looked at me as if I just asked her to sleep with her. And he said she was so shocked, that I hadn't brought my own bags and things. So I said, I'm just wondering if there is, obviously more and more people are starting to bring their own bags and things now. So clearly you've succeeded in that respect, and that message has gone beyond Marks and Spencer's. Is there anything else you could do to take more people along with you?
You're right, the plastic bag thing has been a huge success. It really has changed our customers' behaviour in terms of how they shop, although I can't take any credit for that, because I'm part of the energy team. In terms of the customers, bringing the customers along with us, I think we do gradually try to educate customers with what we do. We have our the night blinds we can pull down on fridges if they're not fully stocked, or if we've moved stock from those fridges. They have the Plan A logo on them explaining that this fridge is closed, and we've got this blind down to save your energy, etc., etc. So we are gradually moving that way. We do quite a lot of PR through our website that engages our customers, to our Plan A website, and I think with our new improved Plan A to 2015, I think there will be more engagement with the public. So I think it's a watch this space. I think we needed to get our own house in order and change things internally prior to engaging so much with the outside world. I don't actually work in our Plan A team. We've got a separate set of people, head office people that do that sort of thing. So I can only give you a vague answer, I'm afraid. Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else want to add to that? Julie, from another end user perspective, or either of the guys from one of their customers' perspectives?
I used to be an energy manager, well, I've been energy manager in various retailers, and I can say that there is one aspect, not Marks and Spencer's, they're wonderful. But one thing, as a consumer, I find particularly frustrating is the heating levels in stores. I did actually try to put through that we should change our uniform policy at one of the places I work, so that we provided our staff with fleeces in the winter, because there really is no need to have the heating on. personal opinion, it's more for the benefit of the staff than it is for the customers. And I have noticed now that customers are more vocal. They will walk into a store in the middle of winter. If it's too hot, they will go to customer services and say, turn your heating off. And also, conversely, in the summer, when it's too cold, which is quite interesting. So, yes, I'm seeing more feedback from customers commenting on the environment within whether it's an office, whether it's a shop, whatever. But customers are more vocal.
I have something to say. Thank you. You've given me time to think about it. If I were asked how I would maybe approach the customer side, I'm a great advocate of saying, don't ask me, let's ask the customer. You've heard of focus groups, etc. It may be that a retail chain might think about employing focus groups, concentrating not just on fashion and so on, what type of food to sell, but maybe that focus group should actually focus on the environment, what sort of an environment they are prepared to shop in, what sort of temperatures they are prepared to tolerate or live with whilst they are going through a so-called shopping experience. And that idea could be extended to packaging, because I know when I have lunch, for instance, if it's a quick lunch, I go into a takeout shop, and if I'm buying a sandwich, it's full of packaging. And I think, why? This is crazy. I don't want to pay for all this, but no one's asked me. So I'm saying, turn the table around and ask the customer.
Yeah, I think an interesting thought, isn't it? Any other questions? I've had another idea that I would like to ask the guys, actually, which is something I just thought about. Quite short and quite general. What should we talk more about? Energy efficiency or carbon? Don't know which of you wants to grab the mic first.
I suppose in some respects, it's a simplistic level. It is nuances. The important thing is that people are gathered here today just talking about it. Incredibly important. I think just stretching the debate a bit further, it's not just carbon, it's water, for example, and that's becoming an increasingly important part of many businesses. It's water footprinting, because that's felt to be a more representative example of the actual embedded energy in final products and services that are being provided. So I think in some respects it's a nuance, and it's a bit of a moot point. The important thing is that we should be talking about it, we should be recording, monitoring it, and obviously from a retailer's perspective, listening to customers as well. But certainly for me, the important thing is that it's on the agenda for large corporations and small business, and that it's being driven by legislation, by policy, but also by consumer demand and market expectations.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add something?
This is a personal viewpoint, not necessarily expressing the views of M&S here, but I mean, I'm a great believer in measuring carbon. I think it's a way of measuring all the impacts then. It's a much more level measure than energy efficiency. I think a lot of people don't understand what a kilowatt hour is within an organisation, whereas carbon emissions are talked about a lot more in the wider world. So I think people are starting to understand carbon in a bit more detail. So I'm much more a fan of carbon.
Again, this is my own personal opinion, not taken as a view of EDF Energy. The problem, I think, is there are so many different words using people mean the same thing. It's like, I don't like waste. Now, do I mean I don't like rubbish? Of course I don't like rubbish. But I don't like waste. I don't like wasting electricity. I don't like wasting gas or water or any other resource that we have. I don't like wasting my time. So what I look at is reducing waste, be that water, electric, anything.
Yeah, interesting. So, Robert, what would you, from your specific point that you made in your presentation, what would be the most specific way of expressing it?
a very, very good question, and I was actually, it was about 3 months ago, myself and about 18 colleagues who are equally very well experienced, having practiced in this area for many years. We actually formed a group to actually discuss primarily that question and a few other things around it, James. So that's a very topical question you put to us. I think I take the point that using carbon, actually in a way, it harmonizes the terrain, if I can put it that way, because it introduces a uniform currency or a single currency, as opposed to tons of rubbish or kilowatt hours of energy, etc., etc. However, there is an issue here, and the issue is, does it actually take away the focus from energy efficiency, which is by far the most, it's the biggest contributor to emission reduction, no matter what you do. So I think there lies the dilemma and the potential conflict. Does it take away, does it dilute the focus on energy efficiency, which always has and will remain until we discover free energy, in whatever form that might be, will remain the biggest lever for us to pull.
Thank you. Right, we're starting to run out of time. Has anyone else got any other questions to ask at all? Otherwise, I will wrap it up. Okay. I actually jotted down a few notes as the guys were speaking, and I think, for me, well, the key point that came across was technology and people are intrinsically linked. I think they all were unanimous on that. But I thought it was quite interesting, slight change of, or difference in language and tactics in some ways. So, we heard it from, about behaviour and motivation on the people side, to automation, monitoring, enabler on the technology side. It was feedback and reporting on the people side. It was metering, AMR, monitoring and targeting on the technology side. So, there were differences for me. But I think the key lessons, or a couple of tips that I wrote down earlier, was one, if we're focusing on people, the important thing is to be specific and sell what's in it for them, which is quite a key recommendation from my perspective, I think. And on the technology side, I think for me the key tip was that you need to engage the people to make it work. So perhaps people did come out on top.